Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and tonight is night 7 of the 2020 ChemKnits Chanukah special. Tonight we are going to look at glazing yarn, over dyeing a really bright colorway with a shallow layer of color where it feels like the color was just lightly brushed on. This is a technique that I don't feel super confident with, and so we are going to try a variety of conditions and tweak them over the course of this video. The goal for glazing is to get the colors to strike really fast, because you really want that dye on the outer layer and not to really soak through the entire fiber, which is the opposite of what we want a lot of the times, but this is an effect that I just love. It is easiest to see this effect on high twist yarn or yarn that is a thicker ply, because the more twist you have, the more resist there is within that fiber, and so therefore you can get color coverage on the outside faster than it can penetrate and soak into the fibers. But let's go start this really deep dive into glazing. The 9 skeins that we are going to dye today are all 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. These are either platinum sock or platinum DK from Wool to Dye For. I've added on removable nylon zip ties, and we may eventually add some vinegar to this soak. But before we get to dyeing the first layer, our pre-glazing layer, onto those 9 skeins, I have 3 additional skeins, I think 2 DK and 1 fingering weight, that we will play around with glazing first. I figure if I try this on the white base with a black overlay, I will be able to get a really good sense of the amount of coverage and how even that coverage is, how many dips I might need to do, and things like that. Dharma True Black is my favorite black to use. It doesn't break with speckling. But I think we might try glazing with Toner Black today. This has some red and yellow pigments in it that you see when speckling, but yeah, I think that maybe we'll try this one for glazing. I saw on some forum that someone prefers using Toner Black for glazing and they use True Black for everything else, so let's give it a shot. I mixed these stock solutions today, a 1% stock of True Black and a 2% stock of Toner Black. In Dye Pot Weekly 44, I started with 12 cups of water, 2/3 of a cup of white vinegar, and then 1/3 of a cup, or about 80 milliliters, of 1% stock solution of Jacquard True Black. So let's start somewhere in the middle here. In this pot I have 16 cups of water, and I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of white vinegar. So a little bit more vinegar than the last one had. Well, that ancient project had. That project was also on, I don't remember if it was Hawthorne or Chroma Twist. It was definitely a higher twist yarn than what I'm using today. Okay, so 16 cups of water, 3/4 of a cup of white vinegar. And now for our dye. Let's add 1 tablespoon or 15 milliliters of our Toner Black stock. Since this is a 2% stock solution, this is actually closer to the equivalent of adding 0.3 grams of dye. Now, in order for color to strike fast, as we've talked about in a recent Dye Pot Weekly, we want hot dye bath, we want high acid, and we're going to want to add our yarn and move it around. In the past, I've tried to glaze yarn while hot. I'm not sure how much of a difference that makes, but if we determine that to make a difference, we can always, before adding dye, add yarn back to a hot pot if it's cooled off. So we're going to be trying this with cool, damp yarn. You could also try this with dry yarn, because then the dye is more likely to strike to the outside, but let's see what we can achieve. Okay, we are getting nice and warm. I'm going to start with a DK skein, and I have squeezed out most of the liquid. You can see it's not dripping, and we are going to add it quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. And that actually looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Here. That was 5 seconds, dry, no acid, and I see that light coverage that I like. I see, and it looks like here, there's a lot of steam, but if I open it up, I do think I see some uneven coverage. Okay, so that was 5 seconds. Or I can't put it in and count it to 5. Let's do this a second time for some more coverage. So in a second time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and lift out. Okay. I am actually really, really happy with how that went and this amount of coverage. Man, okay, so it means I could probably leave it in longer. This is a nice, I would say that we're at like a medium gray level. Let's push it, because we started with no acid in here. There's obviously acid in the yarn now. Let's do another 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, one concern with moving the yarn in the pan is that we could distribute the dye too far into our skein, but by doing multiple dips, we still have tonal coverage, but this is the type of effect I am looking for, where, yeah, that coverage looks light. It feels gray, but it feels like, not like a pale gray yarn, but like you're feeling that gray underneath. I'm not sure if this is something that is really gonna show up well on camera, and I know to many people it might just look like gray yarn, but I am really, really happy with this effect that I'm seeing. Now I'm curious how much dye is left in here. So I'm coming in with 2 skeins of, this is also, that's dry DK weight platinum sock, and you can see that at this stage it looks like there's a lot of pigment in here, but there really isn't that much. I am going to go ahead, and I think I might even bring over my lid. I am going to go ahead and cover this so we don't lose a lot of liquid, but wait 20 minutes, let these minis soak up most of the color that is left before we go on and do another test. That way I'm not going to completely reset what is in the pot. So although I'm happy with the results we just saw, I still want to test having the yarn, like just about 3 tablespoons of white vinegar into our pre-soak. Because I'm planning on dyeing the yarn first, it will likely have acid in it already. So let's try it. And I could try doing both skeins at once. I don't think I'm going to. I think I will just do one at a time. But we're now going to be pre-soaked with vinegar, so when we're ready to go again, that's what we've got. I really don't use my lid very often, unless I'm steaming. Okay, after about 10 minutes, our dye bath has cleared. And the coverage on here is actually very, very similar. The length scale of the two is quite different, and I'm debating as to whether or not this skein here would require additional steaming. I think when I do 9, after this like round of glazing and stopping, I probably will steam set it just to give additional time, even though it has remained warm and so therefore it's supposed to heat for a while. So I don't know. Oof, that's hot. So this, there's similar feeling where like I feel like I would be able to see what's happening underneath. So I think we're probably pretty good to go. Now granted, there's a lot less yarn here. This was this is 40 grams versus 100 grams. And so the color, we used up more than half the dye on our first skein. So let's reset. Let's do another tablespoon of our toner black color. This is the same pot. And now I'm going to bring in some yarn that had pre-soaked with acid. Once again, I squeezed out most of the liquid. We are going to add the yarn quickly to the pot, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up. Woohoo! All right, so this time I immediately notice less even color coverage. So granted, we've only had one dip here versus 3, but the colors are definitely striking fast, but not particularly even. Okay, let's do 2 more dips. This time we're going to try to add the yarn in first that received less of the color. So in, move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. All right, that's helping. It's still not perfectly even, but the other one isn't perfectly even either. Yeah, I mean, I see some good uneven, like, penetration. If I zoom in. Yeah, I like what is happening. Let's do one more because that's what I did before. Go in and 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. All right, I think, I think it's hard to say a lot between the two. Let me go ahead and toss our 30 grams in for at least 10 minutes. We'll let them sort of soak up the little color that's left, and let's go take a close-up look at the yarn I just removed. I think it will be hard to say for sure until the yarn is washed and dried what difference, if any, there is between these two. So this is our original one, and I was happy with that light coverage that we got in here. The color balance is really, really weird. And then in the more recent one, yeah, I think that I'm pretty happy with it as well. I don't know why it's feeling different. It's weird to me that it feels like there's a difference between these two when they had very similar conditions and very similar amount of yarn. Maybe there's more liquid in this one, so let me go squeeze it out. All right, so right now I've got 2 and 1. I have been flipping this around and around. I have a slight preference for the dye application on the first one we did, and I can't put my finger on it. There's so many little variables in there. Ultimately, they are so similar, but I think that what it feels like to me, and I'm not even sure if this is something that I can get across on camera, but it feels like when I had acid in there, the color coverage is a little more even and it penetrated a little deeper. And when we didn't have as much acid there yet, the color is a little bit more on the surface. So it's tiny enough that I'm debating. Oh man, I don't know. The differences between these two are so minor, I really think I'm overthinking it. What I was about to say was that, all right, I think after I dye the yarn, I'm gonna go rinse it just to remove some of that acid before going and glazing it. Realizing that's a bit ridiculous. That is a big bit ridiculous. I think that, yeah, I think that it is not worth that extra step in the dyeing process, and both of them are working well, and I'm getting good coverage. It's not way too much dye. I think the proportions of the amount of dye to yarn and all those things are good. Let's go try one more glazing, this time on fingering weight yarn, and yeah, let's just do one more, and then we'll get into the actual yarn. Okay, it has been 10 minutes. And there's still a little bit of color in here. I'm not gonna worry about that. This yarn is looking beautiful though. I like it. Okay, so we have still a little bit of dye in there. I'm not gonna worry about that. Let's increase a lot of things. I wanna add more acid. So we're gonna add another 1/4 cup of white vinegar to our pot. And we're gonna use more dye. Hopefully this wouldn't mean that we'd run out, but let's add 2 tablespoons this time. So 0.6 grams of dye because it is a 2% stock solution. All right, and we're coming in with our yarn that is cooled off and had acid in it. We're gonna add quickly and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. And okay, we've got, I don't know if you guys can see, we've got some good tonal variation here. Good tonal variation. I am going to arrange this for our second dip. Let's go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. Okay. Okay, and I think we'll do a third dip in a moment. I'm just checking again for where I might want more coverage. 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know if I would be able to do this with 200 grams of yarn at a time. But if this is what I'm doing and adding more dye and then dunking, it would be easy to do multiple in a row. The question is, you know, how much of the pot needs to be cleared in between. By doubling the amount of dye going in, we have more dye on the yarn. Let me look in and see. Yeah, I mean, it feels, see, I don't know if I'm thinking too much. I love the like Madeline Tosh Merino light, the glaze that you see on that high twist. And so some of this isn't gonna feel that light with the twist. It might not feel as surface level. It's certainly not feeling that black to me, but all right, we know some things now. At one point earlier, I said I had 40 grams in minis that I just threw in the pot. I forgot that these are 10 gram minis, so really it is only 10. Like that was 20 grams before, and now I'm adding in 30. And I'm gonna leave these in here. I will be replacing this water when we go on to the next round, but I'm gonna leave this in here to soak up that leftover color so we don't leave any dye behind. There are still a lot of unknowns, but what I do know is that we got nice and fairly even color coverage here on this gray base. So I'm excited, and I like the darker a bit more than the lighter, but you know what? We're gonna dye a sort of really bright colorway and then try to glaze over it. And we can play around with those and treat those skeins differently and try to get a better feel for this. But I am really glad to have tested this out to just to get a sense of the technique, and then I'm happy with it. There have definitely been times in the past where I've tried to glaze yarn and then felt pretty unhappy because I got a lot of coverage in one area and less than another, or the color felt barely there. And so by playing with this first, it's given me, okay, I have like this starting point, and I think that what I have beneath should shine through and be really, really pretty. I still don't know if this is gonna give that perfect like glaze where you feel like the color is just on the surface. I'm still pretty insecure about calling things that, but I think that trying this setup, so starting with 16 cups of water, between 3/4 and a cup of white vinegar, and then having between, I would say, 0.3 and 0.6 grams of toner black dye is a good starting point. And then I dip the yarn in 3 times for about the count of 5 each time. So again, this is a great starting point for me to play with going forward, and I'm very happy about that. I think that if I were playing with Sheila's titanium or similar with this type of technique, then maybe I would be able to get more light surface coverage, and these sort of conditions are something that I want to play around with in the future, and the differences are so minor. Ultimately, it's about getting the effect and the colorway that you want, and I think we're going to be able to get a really, really beautiful colorway out of all of this. So now let's go dye a really bright neon underlayer. I told you these colors would be back. We've got Fluorescent Fuschia, Fluorescent Safety Orange, Fluorescent Lemon, Radioactive, Purple Pop, all of which are fluorescent colors, and then some Frozen, which isn't fluorescent but gives us a beautiful neon blue. And I'm not sure if we have enough dye here for 9 skeins, but given that I don't plan to add a ton of each of the colors to each skein, I think that we will be fine. So my plan is for our final yarn to look something like this, but to have pops of brightness beneath it. That is the plan. I am bringing in 300 grams of our pre-soaked yarn. There is no acid in here yet, but that is coming. These are full skeins of platinum sock, and so they are fairly long, so I'm having to scrunch them up in here, but that is fine for what it is I want to create. I'm going to add 8 cups of water and 3 tablespoons approximately of white vinegar. And now I will move the yarn back and forth to distribute and sort of stir things up. And let's turn on the heat. This colorway right now is a bit inspired by the yarn mop that I did over on night 1 with these brights. And these aren't even, these are unknown percent stock solutions. So I'm going to take the fluorescent fuchsia and do a line of color. These are not going to be evenly spaced. It's not going to be perfectly repeating. There will be spread between these colors. There could be white, but I am okay with all of those things. Okay, we did the fuchsia and the orange. Let's do the purple pop. So far, things are pretty much staying where they're supposed to. That is good. And I speak too soon. But you know what? It is okay. I am not really going to worry about it. Of all these colors, Frozen is the one that probably will penetrate the least. It is probably the one that will strike the fastest of everything that we've got in here. But I absolutely love the combination of Frozen and Radioactive. Just putting that out there. And then finally, we've got our Fluorescent Lemon. Just a couple squirts back and forth. Again, I don't know if I'm going to have enough of all of these colors. I believe upstairs have so I've got lots of purple pop. I probably also have some Fluorescent Lemon in my stash. But I'm now going to let this sit so these colors can absorb. And I don't mind if we've got white left behind. We're going to be over dyeing this anyway. So I will come back in, let's say 10 minutes, but I'm going to try not to touch this until then. I did a very good job of not touching this, if I do say so myself. I did peek though. There's a tiny bit of some pink left. And I think sometimes a little bit of color gets trapped around the edge, but then if you move it, it gets caught. And that is these colors have absorbed. So let's flip it. Oh, but before we flip, I did want to see if we can get a sense. I don't think that the colors are necessarily penetrating that far, but let's flip. And so this, ooh, okay, no, color is moving through in some ways or another. I am not going to obsess over the amount of coverage. Ooh, that is pretty. I'm not gonna obsess over the total amount of coverage in here. I am gonna do a better job of lining things up, but okay. We've got a lot. I checked under and I was like, oh, it doesn't look like we got that much color coverage. Ha, no, we got some color coverage. But we're gonna do, the first time I think I did like a double line of most colors. This time I'm gonna go for just a single line of color. So something like that. Now I know this means that our middle skein will probably get less pigment than the ones on the side, but at some point I have to take a step back and realize that we may not be absolutely perfect. And I want to make sure that we have, okay, I did 2 yellow. I was just like, I am only gonna do 1. And then I promptly did 2. You know, oh dear. As I try to not spray purple pop everywhere. This is our safety orange. Add a tiny bit more to the middle because I am a little worried about you. And then I think it just comes down to, all right, I did 2 of the radioactive. But I think that I am pretty well set. The one color, frozen, I want a little more blue. You're the only one that isn't really spreading as much. So I'm gonna add a little bit more of you so it can sort of spread and blend and be wonderful and beautiful. But this is the colorway that then we will be over dyeing. And actually frozen is the color that has the least amount left. And we're doing pretty well because I really plan, I need to do this twice more to finish up all 9 skeins. So I think that's good. I will check after 10 minutes are up, I will check the inside of these skeins, but I don't think I am going to add any more color. This is very pigmented compared to the pastel we did at the very beginning. And well, we're gonna pump up the pigmentation when we glaze it, but I actually really like this on its own. And depending on how much color is left, we might get some bonus skeins. We'll see, we'll see. I have to dye 6 more first. After another 10 minutes, I moved the yarn, checked the inside, and was really happy with the color coverage. But I decided to leave it in the pan for another 10 minutes just to make sure all the color was absorbed. And then I went ahead and dyed 6 more skeins in this neon rainbow. We still had a lot of dye left behind, and so I decided to create some bonus bright neon rainbows. Initially, I thought that I might do the exact same colorway we're about to glaze and just leave it unglazed, but I went heavier. And even going heavier, I still did not use up all of the dye. The green, blue, and purple pop have a little bit more speckling to them because there's some pigment in there, probably the blue, that strikes pretty quickly. But the pink, orange, and yellow, that bit of green that spreads, it almost looks flame-like in the pan and is so, so pretty. But anyway, I waited 10 minutes, flipped, added more vinegar, all that kind of stuff to create this stunning bonus rainbow. Let's wash our glazed bare yarn, I suppose, where we did get like a lightish coverage. I mean, it's not perfect. I probably could get it to strike a bit faster. I don't know. I think that it is beautiful. And so I haven't actually started glazing the neon rainbows yet, so we will see how that goes. But let's add some dish soap and evaluate the bleeding. The toner black is not a color I use very often, but this is looking really, really nice. I might, under an abundance of caution, still steam set the rainbow glazed yarn as it comes out, just because I can, and because those colors tend to bleed, and I don't know, the neons can bleed, but this looks good. So I'm gonna put this through the spin dryer, hang it up to dry, And I will wash the minis that I did as yarn mops off camera. Still haven't started the official glazing yet, but we can wash this rainbow. See what I mean about the little bit of a flame? And then this side feels almost more feathered because we've got those specks. I don't know. I think that it is really, really fun and bright. And these, it's funny, I might actually end up dyeing too many bonus skeins this year, which wouldn't be a problem. So if I did, then I just wouldn't break up some whole skeins. But I really like these. And oh, thank goodness, I see no bleeding. I'm always worried when dealing with purple pop. That is always just a concern. I'm gonna add some dish soap, and we're gonna continue to cross our fingers here. Because the purple pop is the one that can be finicky, and we are looking good. Thank goodness. All right, I am going to rinse out the soap, put this through a spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and then let's get glazing. Sorry, I'm nervous and excited. I'm not planning for all of these rainbow skeins to be identical. Because I want to get some feel and improve and play around with this technique a little bit. We're starting with 16 cups of water, and I'm going to add 1 cup of white vinegar. The reason why I'm deciding to do this is because this is an easy proportion. If I need to add more water later, I could do 2 cups of water with 1/4 cup of vinegar or similar. So that will be nice. Okay, let's start with 2 tablespoons of our toner black. The reason why I decided to start high is because I'm not planning on clearing off the pot in between each color. But I might next time just add 1 more tablespoon because there's still some residual color left in there. So I want to see how that rhythm goes, but we'll start high and then see if if colors build up more. We're not going to have super consistent results right now. But my goal isn't necessarily consistency. My goal is playing with the coverage and getting a rhythm and something that I like. And I don't even know if I'm going to be able to tell the difference between everything at the end, but I'm going to do my best as we go to evaluate and deciding where I want to tweak things. And we may very well end up with a yarn mop to clear in between. So we will evaluate, but we'll start with still doing 1 skein at a time. I think. Yeah, that's what I feel comfortable with doing. This is looking a little coffee-ish at the moment, but let's go. All right, I've got the yarn. We're going in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Ooh, that is fun. Oh man, it's harder to tell the light and dark areas because it is so variegated. Okay, let's do this again. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. Whew. That is pretty. Okay, I'm gonna set it down for a sec so we can see. I have only done 2 dips thus far, and I'm fairly satisfied. Let's see. I think that some of these undertones will be more apparent once it is dry, but you can see it all there. This is so cool. I do wish the color were a bit darker. I could go in for 1 more dip, but maybe instead let's leave this one and let's do another one. So let's start with a dip for this time in the same dye bath that we used before. So in the same dye bath, I have not added more dye. 1, 2, 4, 5. And so this gave us, okay, a fairly light coverage. I'm now going to add more dye, but this was really, really helpful to see and to know and get a sense of how much color is left after we do a round. So I'm only going to add another 15 milliliters, which again, this is a 2% stock solution. So each time I add a tablespoon, it's actually like adding 2 of a 1% stock solution. Okay, let's go in for time 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This shows really how much color strikes right away, because I'm going to do a third dip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and let's pull this out, drain out some of the water, and we will look at the 2 skeins. Now, this color, this toner black, does break. It does have some other pigments in there, and I don't know if some of those pigments are slower to absorb, but actually these feel very similar. Maybe a slight difference. It's hard to tell based on where you're looking, but they feel fairly similar honestly in terms of the tone, but sufficiently different from where we started by far. All right, let's try this one more time and see if we go a little darker now that we still have some residual color in there. But let's add 2. So this is like where we started with the first, or at least a bit closer. Coming in, and I'm always entering the yarn into the pot a little bit folded into thirds. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, this time I'm seeing a little less evenness. There is this whole area that has less pigment. But yeah, I'm adding the yarn a little bit in thirds, but the goal is to try to get it in and move it and slowly count to 5 as quickly as possible. And I rather like this coverage. Let's take a look at all 3. So the one I just did is right here, and honestly, they feel so similar, and the conditions were all slightly different. So I think that that is pretty cool, and I'm not going to obsess or worry about it. I think because there is some unevenness to all of this and lighter and darker patches, I am now going to go ahead and steam set all of this yarn just for 15 minutes or so. I have a separate steamer basket over on the other burner, and this is just to ensure that things are well set. It's just a precaution, but I really like what we have created. I do think that I'm gonna want to create one that's a bit darker, but let's hold off a moment, and I think let's time lapse. For the next 3 skeins, each time I added 1 tablespoon of the dye, dipped it in 2 to 3 times, moving it around until I was satisfied with the coverage, and then set it aside to steam set in a little while. So in doing this, it never really occurred to me to try to do 2 at a time. I think that it goes so quickly from skein to skein that that wasn't absolutely necessary. I am feeling though like I do wish that there was that it was a little darker. Like these are glazed with gray. They don't really feel glazed with black. Let's do something but I like it. I like it, but we could, let's take one of these and let's go a lot darker on just one of them. I'm risking running out of this dye. I do have another black though, too. Okay, so this will be triple the dye for one of these skeins. Which is still hot and already wet. And let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, that is deeper. Let's go back in. 1, 2, 4, 5. Ooh, it's still feeling gray, but I don't know, let's go in. See, each time I know these last ones don't have as much dye, but this is cool. This one has a lot heavier coverage. Let's compare. I think it's really going to come down to seeing the yarn dry. This is definitely feeling over dyed. I don't know how glazed it's feeling, although I'm not sure how glazed any of them are really feeling. Let's just open this up. And okay, the coverage is shallow. If I open it up, I see various pinks in there. So this is so pretty, and these colors are so subtle in there. I really like it. Oh, but I don't know what to do. All right, let me know down in the comments what you would do. Would you do them all darker like this, or leave it a little lighter with a little bit more of that haze of color? And for education purposes, let's get a sense of, if I dip this quickly, how much color is here. So we were able to get like nice coverage, but it's fairly pale. So that was one dip in what was left. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we're definitely getting darker. So there is plenty of pigment in here. Now, there's no question that we are losing water volume as this goes on, and we could also be losing some amount of acidity as well. I'm not super concerned about it, but it's just worth mentioning. All right, we have been dyeing 100 grams of yarn at a time. Let's do 200. Just once, just to see. And I am going to start with 30 milliliters of this stock. So it's equivalent amount of dye to what I added sometimes previously, but we're going to have double the yarn in the pot, so we'll see what we get coverage-wise. It definitely feels more crowded. 3, 4, 5. And okay, there are some light patches, but actually it is feeling more glazed. Potentially some of the difference that we're seeing here is due to the fact that we're dealing with the decay now. Putting it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And okay, I'm gonna reorder these and come back. And let's go in for the third time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a lot of sweaty work, but I will say that it's not taking as long to do all this glazing as I thought. Doing 200 grams at a time worked. There's definitely, I think, more variation in the tone versus some of the fingering weight ones that I did 100 grams at a time. The coverage was a lot more even. But this is really, really cool. I'm wondering if I shouldn't do so many dips. I don't know, everyone. I don't know. Would you call this glazed? What would you call it? I also know sometimes with some techniques you need to pick the right yarn, and if this were a higher twist yarn, I think I would get a result closer to the one that I was going for, but nevertheless I think that this is beautiful. There is one final skein to glaze, and we are gonna go a bit bigger in our initial color. So that's 1 tablespoon, not quite 2, of our toner black. And now I'm coming in with our 1% stock solution of true black. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is more like 4 tablespoons of our 2% stock, or 8 tablespoons of the 1%. So this is a lot more color now. Oh, I like that you can see the reflection. All right, coming in with our final bright. One thing I noticed, well, first I want to squeeze out the liquid in here. that is one thing that helps get the even coverage. Another thing is when I hold it up in thirds to make sure the yarn isn't twisted at all. But let's go in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoa! I'm not going back in, I don't think. Oh, that is cool. That is so, so cool. Oh man, oh man. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off. Let me bring over the pan. This is the darkness that I was wanting. You still feel that shallow color, but it's more pigmented than the other patches. Probably because we had more dye. I guess I should have been starting with more dye, and maybe we do need to wait longer. Clearly, there is still so much that I have to learn when it comes to glazing, but I'm really, really enjoying doing this really deep dive because I feel like each time I tweak things and see if they make a big difference or not as much of a big difference, that is helping me think about how I can refine this technique moving forward. Unfortunately, I also don't have the skeins labeled, and so the differences between them are going to be really, really subtle. But we did learn something. It's easier to do 100 grams in the pot than multiple. Even if the dye in the pot hasn't cleared, what's left is fairly light coverage. So if I add a significant amount of dye, 0.3 grams is fairly significant. You get the most color coverage from that first dip. So that makes a bigger difference than the later ones. And going even bigger, even if there's probably a lot more dye left in the pot now, that got me closer to a black versus these more medium grays. I could go and redunk all of this in more color, but I'm not going to. I'm not sure how much of a difference the toner black versus true black really made. I don't think that that made a real impact in here, but certainly there's a lot more to explore, and I think that I need to explore this more with intent. Now, the one problem with this being a Chanukah video is that, well, we could have some glazing attempts and glazing videos come out before this, and I'm gonna have to try not to reference this. So that's something that I will need to keep in mind as I schedule everything. There is no question that I was being cautious today. Not that I was nervous or anything, but I was definitely being cautious because I didn't want to use too much color or too little. But before we wait for things to cool, and I will steam set for 15 minutes just because I'm being overly cautious today. But one last thing I want to do, and we have some leftover dye in the pot, and I even have a little bit left on the counter. So let's go take care of it. This is not the only dye that we have left. I've got a mixture of our blacks from when I made my dye stocks this morning. Not to mention residual color from rinsing out this stock bottle. And now I'm coming in with a dry skein of platinum sock, putting it in quickly, stirring it around, making a tangled mess. I will lift it up to check on the coverage, but that's actually not bad. I wonder how dark this one will be. Oh, interesting. All right, I am going to leave this in here on the heat for probably about 25 minutes, and then turn off the heat, let all the color absorb, let it cool, and this one I will wash off camera. You never know. Sometimes I say I'll wash something off camera and then show you guys anyway, but this color is deep. This one may not feel glazed in the end, but I'm excited. That's not all the leftover color, but I will cap these and save them for another day. Our different glaze skeins aren't labeled, so I won't be able to easily be like, oh, this is the one I did more dye. But we'll be able to tell the color difference between the lighter and the darker and know that that contributed. And I'm seeing no bleeding, which is nice, because there is, from this black, a bit of residue in the pot. So I was curious if we would see some light bleeding, and maybe with the addition of some dish soap, we might. But I am very, very happy with these colors. And I think with that leftover neon, I might try to do a bonus video on a higher twist yarn and try the same protocol and see how it turns out. But I'm now going to rinse out the soap, put the yarn through my Nina Stuff spin dryer, and hang it up to dry. I also wanted to briefly pop in on our matte black or charcoal gray skein, and I'm seeing no bleeding in here. This is very dark. I don't think it's gonna feel true black, which is why I said like matte black, because it might be like a hair lighter than black, but we'll see once it is dry. Right now, while wet, it's certainly looking very black and beautiful. But anyway, no bleeding, spin dryer time. Let's start looking at the finished dry bonus skeins, because the actual colorway from tonight is like a blend between the two. For these bonus neon rainbows, I went in a lot heavier than I did for what we were gonna glaze over. And as I mentioned, the colors between the pink, orange, and yellow sort of seamlessly blend together. And then you see almost this, it feels like a feather, like speckling and modeling from the green, the blue, and the purple pop. And it really does feel like two different colorways to me almost. But something about it is so bird and parrot-like to me that I love it, even if it feels so different. We started out exploring a few different glazing techniques. I explored this on bare yarn to try to get a work on the shallow application of color. And there are a few observations that I have. I'm not sure how well it picks up on camera, but we definitely feel like we've got this light application of color, a very shallow application of color in both the decay, in our fingering, and really in both of the ways where we had vinegar at the beginning or not. But I think that the yarn I almost like the best are these yarn mops. And I think the big problem I had was the amount of pigmentation. Like, I love the glazed feel that we have on this skein, which got to stay in the dye pot a lot longer than these that I started with for the samples. So I think that I need to play with things more. I might need to play with moving in, but then leaving it in the pot for longer, which is a little counterintuitive, but yeah, I definitely need to explore all of this more in the future. Finally, all of our leftover dye gave us a beautiful, I would call it sort of a deep charcoal gray. It's a bit blown out here on camera, but it is definitely a deep, darker, saturated color. And I love it. I still have some more of the neon dye, and I can mix more of the black that we used. I think that I want to try these conditions with some tighter twist yarn, say Hawthorne or something, and try, you know, the condition that I used for one of these or for most of the main skeins, try setting it up and leaving it in the pot with a lot more dye. I guess those are the main two things that I'd want to try. And maybe I guess a short time in the pot with just a lot of dye in there to get a deeper glaze. But let's look at the finished yarn, and I think that you'll really like what you see. Here is the yarn that we dyed for this video, specifically for this video. And what I think is really, really cool is that with the exception of the two where I intentionally went a bit deeper and darker, the level of coverage across the other skeins feels very, very similar. Not identical. These all have unique qualities to them, but given that some of these I cleared the pot before glazing again, and well, actually maybe I had dye in the pot each time. So the amount of dye that was in the pot at any given time did vary a bit. But the difference between having, you know, that amount of dye that you had in the pot didn't make a huge, huge difference between the total amount of dye on the yarn when everything was only in the pot for like 15 to 20 seconds total, probably. There was one skein at the very end, and I'll give a close-up on this one in particular, where we had 4 times the amount of dye. And that one is absolutely deeper, and I really, really love it. But on all the yarn, we do have a beautiful glaze. This is probably the second darkest one, but I picked it just to show, you know, if I open this up, you can see some variation in those plies. And that is because the color was striking unevenly to our yarn. And so there's some light areas inside this ply because the color was striking to the outside. And I think you get a bigger difference when you have more dye in there. I think I was a little bit shy and a little bit restrained, but I think all of the colorways are gorgeous. Here's one with some more medium tones that is fingering weight. And if I untwist, I do still see, it's a little more subtle, but I do see some differences in the evenness of the color. And that, when it comes to glazing, is what we're looking for. I don't want even color coverage. I want to feel almost like the color was airbrushed on, so it didn't go very far in. But I love how we still have the pops of our pink, the orange, the yellow, our green, blue, and then purple pop through this black or really gray color that we have all over. The deepest colorway has some interesting details. I definitely feel a wash of color, but there are absolutely areas where it almost feels like a barber pulling effect in here. And which could be because there could be slightly different batches from like the way the skein was. I don't feel this barber pulling. There we go, you can kind of see it. I don't feel that barber pulling on the other skeins, so I'm not sure what it is about this particular one, unless, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I've heard that can happen maybe if there were two, like the plies came from 2 different batches, and so there could be some unevenness of like the superwash or something, but it's beautiful, just not what I saw on any of the other skeins, and so it's a little perplexing. But I think it works well on this skein, given that we were going for this heavier coverage of color. And we wanted to see like a glaze, and you can see some of the pink underneath. We wanted to see sort of a wash of dark color on top of our brights. And you can still very much see all of the bright colors underneath it. It's just this skein is overall deeper than some of the other ones that we did. I would say my biggest lesson for myself today is don't be afraid to go big. If this is more of the tone that I had in my head, I was a little nervous to push there. And so I stopped at some paler versions, which are still gorgeous. It's just a very different feel. And, you know, maybe I don't need to have that hesitation going forward. But I found this video and doing so many samples and tweaking the technique helped me in terms of confidence, because the main thing that I was nervous about was getting coverage on the yarn and the multiple dips. This one has a little less even coverage on it, but doing multiple dips definitely helped you get something that felt more even across versus having some like super dark and super light patches. So that's something I want to play with going forward. But I think that trying these techniques and this exact protocol on a higher twist yarn will definitely be a good learning process for me. And I haven't filmed it yet, but maybe, just maybe, you'll see something like that before the end of 2020. I know that I certainly learned a lot over the course of this video, and I hope that you did as well. I absolutely love the way that we got these muted colors, starting with things that are so bright. And now it's fun to compare our more glazed colorways to the ones that did not have the neon beneath. And you can really see the difference in the lighter ones. In the deepest skeins in person, you can really see the difference, but it is fairly subtle as it looks on camera. The fun thing with the Chanukah series and this Chanukah special is that there are bonus skeins. I like to include 100 grams in the samplers, and there's only 8 nights of Hanukkah, so I use these bonus skeins that you see on the top row for some of the bonuses people get to open. And so a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people will get either a bright or a dark from tonight. Some potentially could get one of each. And so you can play with those minis together, and I think that that was just a really fun way to do things tonight. I absolutely need to play with glazing more. It is a very popular thing, and it's something that I still don't feel like I can do very well. There are many times I get a colorway that feels glazed and like a leave no dye behind, but it's like with a bunch of leftovers, and that wasn't exactly what I was trying to do. And so I find this in particular to be a lot harder for me to do with intent. And I hope over the next year to really push myself to improve on this so I feel a lot more confident whenever I want to. Phew! This was a long video, longer than I intended, and I think that if this were something I was filming for Dye Pot Weekly, I probably would have split it up into 2 videos. But I kept the length of it because I thought that it was really helpful to see how the tweaks that I made either made a big difference or not so big of a difference in terms of our glazing technique. And I'm not done with this. There's actually going to be a Dye Pot Weekly episode in the next week or 2 where we're going to play with this colorway again, but on higher twist yarn. And so taking everything I learned tonight and building on that further. I'm still really happy with the colors we created. I just think that I need to be more willing to go for it and try. And that I've been a little nervous when it comes to this. And I think that if I keep trying, maybe I need to do beyond that another video where I try 10 versions of glazing to keep tweaking things and figure out until I can get those conditions that are exactly what I want. If you love the yarn that I dye, go and check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. My shop is filled with yarn that is hand dyed in these videos, and sometimes you can even get sneak peeks of content coming up on the channel because yarn might be listed in the shop before I've published the video. So go and check it out. I'll have a link to ChemKnits Creations down in the video description. And please make sure that you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. That's honestly the biggest way that you can support the content here, subscribing and engaging with these videos, giving them a thumbs up, dropping a comment down below. So please double check that you're subscribed, and while you're at it, turn on those notifications. There's a playlist for ChemKnits Chanukah videos, so if you missed a night, you can go catch up. They will all be located there as soon as they have been published. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I would like to wish you all a very, very happy Chanukah. Thank you so much for watching.